Is the U.S. seeking to tear Canada apart? Fresh reports indicate that Canadian separatists have been meeting American officials. They are seeking money from Washington to help fund a breakaway nation. And these reports have alarmed Ottawa, which is already dealing with increasing pressure from Trump. A report in the Financial Times says that the leaders of a Canadian separatist called the Alberta Prosperity Project have been holding meetings with senior U.S. officials. The separatists have met Trump administration officials 3 times since April last year, and they plan to meet again in February this year. The Canadian separatists want to sit down with U.S. state and treasury officials next month. Their goal is to try and get a $500 billion credit facility from the U.S. They want to use this credit line to bankroll Alberta if it decides to cede or to secede from Canada. This is Alberta. It's Canada's 4th largest province by area and the 4th most populated. It's home to about 5 million people. But what makes Alberta special is that it's Canada's leading oil producer. The Alberta Prosperity Project wants to hold a referendum. They want Albertans to vote on whether to remain in Canada or become a separate sovereign nation. The separatists are currently trying to gather 178,000 signatures in a petition which would force Alberta to hold the vote. If they were to secure a funding commitment from the U.S., it may convince more Albertans that secession is actually viable. Alberta has had a small separatist movement since the 1930s. The movement has seen periods of traction and decline through the decades. But it has not held a referendum so far. Only Canada's French-speaking Quebec province has held secession referendums in the past, in 1980 and 1995. Quebec's separatists lost both times, but reports say the Albertan separatists have reached out to the leaders of the Quebec referendum to learn from their mistakes. This is because they believe that the time is ripe to get Alberta to secede from Canada. The latest boost for Alberta's separatist movement came after the 2025 general election with the victory of Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Liberal Party. Alberta has been a conservative bastion for years, and the Liberal Party, extending its 10 years in power, brought renewed calls for Alberta to chart its own course. The separatist group, the Alberta Prosperity Project, reportedly met U.S. officials for the first time in April 2025. That's the month of the general election, when the Liberal Party returned to power. The separatists plan to meet American officials again in February, just days after the latest tensions between Trump and Carney. Remember, Trump recently threatened Canada with 100% tariffs if it signs a trade agreement with China. Also on Thursday, he threatened a separate 50% tariff on Canadian aircraft. Carney drew Trump's ire during the World Economic Forum in Davos. Carney made global headlines for his speech at the summit, where he indirectly blamed Trump for the end of the post-World War II global order. He has been facing regular threats from Trump ever since. Carney was asked about the Alberta separatist meeting U.S. officials, and this was his response.
We expect the U.S. administration to respect Canadian sovereignty. I'm always clear in my conversation with President Trump to that effect, and then move on to what we can do together.
I'd like to ask, in those conversations, has he ever raised the prospect of Alberta or Quebec separation?
No.
So far, reports indicate that the U.S. is not planning to bankroll the Albertan separatists. However, last week, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent hinted that he was supporting the referendum initiative. He said Albertans are very independent people and that they wanted what the U.S. has. Will this seemingly tacit support turn into a real financial commitment, or is it just a way for the Trump administration to play Canadians against each other? Mr. Dean Baxendale is a publisher and global columnist, Sunday Guardian, political and also policy analyst. He is now joining us live on this broadcast. Mr. Baxland, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for your time and welcome to the broadcast. What do you think Albertans really want right now, and why are they talking to U.S. officials?
Well, I think this is a small group of separatists that have always been part of Alberta's makeup. Currently, the polling suggests that there's 19% support for Alberta separation from Canada. I think what Albertans overall are looking for is to ensure that Mark Carney and the Liberal government builds out a program, economic program for energy that benefits all of Albertans and also benefits Canadians. That includes a new pipeline to go east to west to the West Coast to bring bitumen and other products to Tidewater so that we can export those to India, and who I hope that we are currently, this week, there were some announcements on that with our foreign minister on energy, so our energy minister, and India is a natural market that we need to expand. So Albertans are looking for prosperity. They're looking for a vision for Canada. I think Mark Carney, as Prime Minister, is doing the best he possibly can, given how Donald Trump is approaching this negotiation. And that is not with the kind of negotiating tactics that we've seen in the past. And he is absolutely aiming to separate and divide Canadians, and I think the Prime Minister is standing up to him.
So what happens next for Alberta? Because we understand that the Separatists have been holding meetings not only with the United States officials, but also with Quebec referendum officials. They want a referendum just like Quebec. Do you think that is feasible? Do you think that is possible?
I think that's going to be up to Albertans. The current Premier Daniel Smith does not support this strategy at all. Having, working with Quebec Separatists, I was involved with the Save Canada or Say No and Say Yes to Canada in the last referendum in '95. I think that Canadians will once again come together and fight these kinds of separatist notions for both Quebec and for Alberta. But again, it's a free and democratic country, and we allow those to operate within our democracy, free speech. But I think ultimately that when push comes to shove, both Albertans and Quebecers will reject the notion of separating from Canada. We're stronger, unified, and also working with the United States on a continental security and economic pact that will ultimately make us a fortress in the long run and actually safeguard us against China, and working ultimately to try to build partnerships with ASEAN and India, as the Prime Minister has so spoken in the last few days.
Mr. Dean Baxendale, it's good to see you. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you. Cheers.